Thank you, Burhan, and let me add a belated welcome. As a host, I'm delighted that I could host the TASSA conference. Burhan used the word phenomenal, and that's not necessarily positive, so I'll let you judge for yourself. My connections to Turkey go back about 25 years, as Burhan pointed out, when Mr. Dormaji made me a job offer, which unfortunately I had to turn down. And I've since regretted not finding good Iskandar anywhere in the U.S. I still think the best Iskandar in the world is made at Haji Arif Bey in Ankara. And so it's a pleasure to be here. And I was asked to speak for a few minutes. And I wanted to speak about my school, but not make it an infomercial. And especially after looking at the young scholars who are here before me, I wanted to have some content. At the same time, if I gave you my talk on the applications of the Fokker-Planck equation in in routing of taxis, you would not be very impressed either. So I decided to speak on something which has slowly dawned on me as an administrator. And this is, how does one build a lasting business school of value in a research university? And this is something that is one of those things where we are about 117 years too late. When Eric Isaacs, the provost, spoke earlier, he talked about the university being 125 years old. The business school was started very soon after the university was started. So we are the second oldest business school in the world after Wharton. And for a long time, we did what I see around the world happening, which is business schools are built in a way that are kind of idiosyncratic to the university. And in particular, the topic is, does science ever penetrate the business school? Right? There are lots of scientists in this audience. And at the same time, can a school that is solely designed to serve a profession, namely the professional manager, can it really do science in the kind of broad definition of science? And in particular, what's the right HR model for this? How does one staff such a school? And so that's what I intend to spend the next 10 minutes on, and I know I stand between you and lunch, so feel free to walk out whenever you're sufficiently hungry. So our first solution was terrible. We had a lemon for a business school. I know this is sacrilege, but for the first 60 years of its existence, our business school was a lemon. In case you don't know what a lemon is, it's a derogatory term for something that doesn't work very well. And it was called Haskell High. The reason was the business school was in a building called Haskell Hall, and undergraduates who had finished a very rigorous undergraduate program at the University of Chicago. University of Chicago has always had a very rigorous undergraduate program. In fact, everybody still reads Plato, but we've gone soft and let them read it in English now. So, and they would then go to business school and realize it was easier than their undergraduate program. So they called it Haskell High School. They thought they had regressed back when they went to. And we were that way for a while. And in 1959, something happened, which is the Ford Foundation decided to commission a study of the state of business schools. So so did actually the Carnegie Foundation. So two separate foundations decided to take stock. And in 1959, the report I will concentrate on is called the Gordon-Howell Report. It was founded by the Ford Foundation, and it was just scathing. If you thought I was making fun of my school, you should have seen what the report said about it. And it wasn't just about Chicago. It was about all of U.S. business education. The thing had become vocational. Right? And what are the basic things that a vocational school have? It basically has three characteristics, which the Howell report pointed out. It was always asking the following question, very close to practice, and asking the question, why does what work in practice work? This is, there used to be a T-shirt at the U of C where people would wear a T-shirt that said, we know it works in practice, but does it work in theory? And so this was part of the type of work that was being done, very close to context, and usually done by practitioners, so where the differentiation between consulting and research was non-existent, right? And the second was the creation of formulas and rules for success. the 23 ways to be the best manager in the world. You should, of course, never read such a book, right? It's the work of the devil, and there's no other way to describe it. There are no 23 rules to be a successful manager. And so this extreme closeness to context, and for those of you who are familiar with modes of inquiry, this was actually extreme end of induction, where you're looking so close at specific examples that you are not able to generalize back out at all. And it was tolerated by the universities solely because it produced excellent alumni. Right? Eventually, the chair of board of trustees would come out of the business school, and therefore it was tolerated. And this was the state of affairs in '59, and the report called it out. In all gory detail, it was called out. And there became construction. It's a long project. It took us about 30 years to get it right. But I feel there is a lesson here to be learned as many universities around the world start building business schools today. And you see this, I see it a lot in India when I travel, and there's a lesson there to be learned. The first one was the pendulum was swung exactly in the opposite direction. So what we became almost overnight was a school of applied social science. We became an applied economics department, we became an applied psychology department, and applied sociology department. So we actually went the other way, and it was because of one guy. If you really want to think of dean's legacies, by far, our most impressive dean was a guy called Alan Wallace. And if you want a list of deans, one of my predecessors, who, by the way, I'm ranking second, was George Schultz. So this Wallace I rank a little bit higher than Schultz because he hired Schultz. And Wallace went on to hire a bunch of serious researchers. And the question was, okay, so you have researchers, but you have to educate professionals. So what's the trade-off here? How do you do this? And so what we ended up doing was having a severe bias towards empiricism. So we were one of the few social science departments that actually emphasized, and that remains to this day, where as a theorist, I still feel I'm a little bit of an outsider. And so I occasionally write a paper with data just so that I'm allowed to eat lunch in the faculty lounge. So this is and so the empiricism was how the application was taken care of. You must get your data from the real world, and you must test your ideas with experiments in the real world. But in between, you didn't have to be part of the real world. In fact, it was better for you to step away from it. And this is exactly, of course, the relationship between biology and medicine, as you can imagine, right? You don't want to be too close to practice to be a first-rate research biologist. And that was the model that got adopted by Chicago. And it worked great. For example, the hires at that time were Farmer, Stiegler, Miller. All of those guys went on to do stuff that other people care about. And you can look them up if you want. And so that was all very good, except for one thing. We forgot the education part. So because the pendulum had swung too far, we started producing an increasingly angry set of alumni who went out in the real world and suddenly realized when they used the word mechanism design, nobody else cared. Right? So they had to know about the real world in such a way. And so we had to actually come back, and that took us another 10 years. So it's a long haul to get this right, but if there is a prescription in mind, what I'm saying, it's better to get the pendulum too far down the applied social science end and then correct on education than to emphasize education up front and then never build the faculty. And that's what I see wherever I go, and that's why I'm talking about this. So how did we correct back on the education thing? We did three things. One is we let the faculty teach whatever it is that they're most comfortable teaching. If it is mechanism design, that's fine. Let them teach it. And then we started getting mature students. We are actually the oldest MBA class in the world, if you look on average age. They're 28 years old when they come in. And the reason they're 28 years old is they've already figured out what they need to know in practice, and then we give them flexibility to figure out what they'll learn in theory. Right? Rather than trying to tell them, this is what makes for a good education, we say, well, you figure it out. You're 28 years old. And so that has been a second one. But that's not enough, because by doing things like that, it is still hard to teach certain things. Leadership is an example of that. If you look at all books on leadership, every statistician blanches when he sees or she sees a book on leadership because it's full of sample bias. They pick characteristics based on the leaders who succeeded. You know, dropping out of college is how you become the richest man in the world, right? Bill Gates did that. They forget about the 9.7 million college dropouts who don't have a job, right? So this is, but still it's hard to teach leadership in a systematic way. For us, we take some compromise approach. We have practitioners who do a little bit of it, but we also have someone like Nick Epley. Nick Epley is a psychologist. He won the American Psychological Association's Early Career Award. And Nick teaches a class called Designing a Good Life, which is really not a design of life class as much as an applied psychology class, meant to open people's minds as to how hard all of this is. And it seems to work for us. And finally, we have a very strong selection bias. We've always had it in who comes to our program. We are idiosyncratically theoretical in that sense. And therefore, only people with a very high tolerance for the fundamentals come to our program. And we'd rather run an idiosyncratic program than try to be like everybody else. And does it work? Well, one of the downsides of my life, as you can imagine, is I eat a lot of dinners with a lot of alumni, right? For the obvious reason. We are a private school. There isn't a government check anywhere in the near term or long term for that matter. And so I was at a fundraiser, and there were two people sitting next to me, both of whom I will name them simply because they wouldn't mind being named. One of them was called David Booth. He's the guy whose name's on the door. And the other guy is Howard Marks, who runs a company called Oak Tree Capital, who you might have heard of. And both of them were arguing about the merits of a paper written by two guys called Grossman and Stiglitz was the paper they were arguing about. What they were arguing about was whether or not markets were in equilibrium. This is a technical subject. The paper is quite technical. And yet it has deep philosophical implications as to how much you trust markets. And here are two people who are captains of industry, made a lot of money in their lives, and yet what they got most pleasure out of at this fundraiser was not telling us about how they had succeeded in life, but rather on whether or not they believed markets were efficient and why they didn't believe they were entirely efficient and how they made money by not believing that. And so this is the alumni we produce. So they're an idiosyncratic bunch. They're not very socially adept. But on the other hand, they seem to do well in society and hopefully do good for society as well. And so for all the dignitaries who are here, maybe there is some lesson here on trusting the basic academic principles of science, empiricism, falsifiability, rigor, and it works even in the most applied of settings you can imagine, like business. It works in a certain peculiar idiosyncratic way, but it works nonetheless. So that I like to take credit for as the Chicago approach. It's not entirely the Chicago approach. Several other schools look similar, MIT, Stanford, for example. But we get it, we have the purest form of it in that we are the quirkiest of the lot. Right? And so, but it works for us. And so I thought this may be of some interest to you. I'm happy to take questions or adjourn for lunch as Burhan tells me to. Adjourn? Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time.